the Sith. This is the end of the prequel trilogy, and we will be starting naturally with the first mission. So, Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, Chapter 1, Battle over Coruscant. The Republic is crumbling under a separatist assault led by Count Dooku and General Grievous. In a stunning move, separatist forces have swept into Coruscant and kidnapped Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. As the droid army attempts to flee with their hostage, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker lead a desperate mission to rescue the Chancellor. So, this will continue our quest to play through all of the LEGO Star Wars movies. And here we have the very exciting opening to Episode 3, which starts with a space battle over Coruscant. This mission is relatively easy to get 100% on. I'm pretty sure you don't need to play it again. You can just get everything in story play. You don't have to do free play. And it's kind of a unique mission because it is a sort of on-the-rails arcade-style shooter where your ship's course is predetermined and you simply fly down the predetermined course. You do have a little bit of freedom to maneuver on the screen, but for the most part you are just flying down the train rails that the developers have created for you. So you just have to watch out for the mini kits floating in the air, and the studs will largely take care of themselves. So we'll see if I can get 100% here. I really like the separatist ships. The different styles are all very cool and distinct and iconic in different ways. The Republic is just using these Venator ships, which are certainly cool in their own right, but I like the variety of the separatist ships. You of course have those huge circular droid control ships, and then the very long spear-like, oh, just barely missed the red brick there. So we will not have 100% from our first playthrough. And then these, yeah, I don't know what types, what you would call these sort of frigate ships of the separatists. The one that we're passing right now. They're pretty cool as well. What I like about the LEGO games is, one of the things that I like is, I feel like they try to vary up the missions so that you're not kind of doing the same thing mission after mission. So we just just had a pretty unique, kind of on-the-rails shooter there. And now we'll get to have a more traditional, combat-focused mission. We did get a true Jedi, and we got all the mini-kits, so we'll stick around here and watch all of the mini-kits get loaded in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Which gets us quite a deposit of studs. I wasn't paying close attention, but it looked like maybe 50,000. So we will continue on to Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Episode 3. Revenge of the Sith. Chapter 2. Chancellor in Peril. High above the planet Coruscant, a deadly battle rages between Separatist forces and the Army of the Republic. On the Separatist flagship, Count Dooku and General Grievous hold Chancellor Palpatine captive. Crashing their Jedi starfighters into the main hangar, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker are surrounded by hostile droid forces. Also, rest in peace to R4. I think this is, he gets killed in that space battle, right? He gets torn apart by the buzz droids, if I remember correctly. And I like, Obi-Wan just crashing into the hangar, whereas Anakin comes in for a much nicer landing. And Obi-Wan stumbles out of the ship. Of course, Anakin is a very adept pilot, one of the best in the galaxy. And Obi-Wan does not so much have a fondness for vehicles. So, we fight our way through some droids, trying to get to the Chancellor. And in the movie, this section of them on the ship is one of the many ways in Star Wars history that Shaak Ti has been killed. I feel like in the games and movies and shows, we just see variation after variation of Shaak Ti getting killed in a way that doesn't happen for the others. I guess it's because Shaak Ti's death in this movie was cut footage. And so various later materials saw that as a blank space where they could insert Shaak Ti's death. I haven't watched the footage in a long time, but I think in this version, in this movie, General Grievous stabs her in the back. She's being held prisoner, if I remember correctly. And let's see if I can remember some of the others. I think she might have died in the Genndy Tartakovsky show. I do know she dies in this as well. When you're at the Jedi Temple. So we'll see that as we play deeper in. Of course, she dies in Force Unleashed game. So you chase her down to Felucia. But yeah, I just feel like Shakti gets killed all the time in various Star Wars media. Let me know if you can think of any that I missed. I think, because she doesn't have a canonical death, well, I wonder if she does now. In the current Disney canon, does Shakti have a canonical death? Because I don't think that this movie, that cut scene is canonical. I don't know though. I do not know. I do not know. Shakti, 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 Shakti. Should we do some Jedi Master trigger word ASMR? Shakti, 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 Depapalapa, 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 Depapalapa. Mace Windu, Mace Windu, Mace Windu. That's not a very good one, is it? Mace Windu, Mace Windu. Not the best trigger name. We're tier listing Jedi Council member trigger words, trigger names. I think Depapalapa is a pretty good one. Depapalapa, 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 Depapalapa. That's gotta be A tier in my opinion. Kit Fisto, 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 Kit Fisto. Saying that name over and over again is making me think of that Fisto droid from Fallout New Vegas. If you know, you know. A very different job than what Kid Fisto had. I think Kid Fisto is kind of like B tier. It's okay, but I don't know. Kid Fisto, Kid Fisto, Kid Fisto, Kid Fisto, Kid Fisto, Kid Fisto, Kid Fisto. I don't think that's the best trigger name. Kaidai Mundi, 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 Kaidai Mundi. Or are you sorry, I'm suddenly recalling that I pronounce his name in a weird way. Kiadi Mundi, right? Isn't that how it's actually pronounced? I think this has come up in my comments before. Something about how I pronounced his name weird, and it's just because as a kid, reading the Star Wars books and playing Star Wars games where you could play as him, I was just reading his name and that's how I said it, Kaidai Mundi. But of course I think it's Kiadi Mundi. Kiadi Mundi, Kiadi Mundi, Kiadi Mundi, Kiadi Mundi, Kiadi Mundi, Kiadi Mundi. Kaidai Mundi, Kiadi Mundi, Kaidai Mundi, Kiadi Mundi, Kaidai Mundi, Kiadi Mundi, Kiadi Mundi, Kiadi Mundi, He's kind of mid as well. It's kind of a mid trigger phrase. I think that's going B tier for me. However you choose to pronounce it. Did I already rank Shakti? Shakti, Shakti, Shakti. Shakti, 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 Shakti. I like that one. I think that's A tier, maybe even S tier. Shakti, 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 Shakti. The bounce from the K to the T is very triggering for me. Shakti, 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 Shakti. Let's think of a couple others. Of course, we have Yoda, 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 Yoda. That's got to be F tier, I think. Yoda, Yoda. Well, you do have the D. Yoda, 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 Yoda. You know what? We'll get that D tier because of the D. Yoda, 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 Yoda. And then let's do Yaddle, 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 Yaddle. That's awful. That's F tier. Yoda is definitely better than Yaddle as a trigger name, so we're putting Yaddle in F tier and we're putting Yoda in D tier. And let's see who else. Plo Koon, 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 Plo Koon. Plo Koon, 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 Plo Koon. That's a pretty good one. Plo Koon, Plo Koon. Bros, bros. I think I'll give that a, I think Plo Koon is a, Plo Koon, Plo Koon, Plo Koon. I don't know. Plo Koon, Plo Koon. That's a B tier for me, somewhere maybe low A tier or high B tier, one of those. Who else is on the council? Of course, we have Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan Kenobi, 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 Obi-Wan Kenobi. That's okay. The little long Obi-Wan Kenobi, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Obi-Wan Kenobi. I think that's C tier. Then of course we have Anakin Skywalker, who is famously on the council, but not granted the rank of master. It's outrageous. It was so unfair. Anakin Skywalker, 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 Anakin Skywalker. I don't know. Anakin Skywalker, Anakin Skywalker, Anakin Skywalker, Anakin Skywalker. That's maybe B tier. That's gotta be B tier for me. How about, oh, you know what, that's enough of our tier list, I think. We have another opening crawl to read here. Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, Chapter 3, General Grievous. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker have saved Chancellor Palpatine, but his captor, General Grievous, has escaped. The Jedi Council assigns Obi-Wan Kenobi the task of hunting down Grievous, who is hiding on the single world of Utapau. Utapau, 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 the single world of Utapau. Yeah, let me know if there's any other Jedi Masters that you think are great trigger names. Jedi Council members that have good trigger names, but I think we've spent enough time ranking them today. So we have the General Grievous boss fight here, and it is Obi-Wan fighting with Commander Cody. Of course, they're usually fighting side by side in the Clone Wars. Anakin with Rex and Obi-Wan with Cody. It makes it very sad to see Cody turn on Obi-Wan with Order 66. When you watch this movie again, after having seen the Clone Wars and stuff, to watch Cody just betray Obi-Wan immediately. Now, of course, we have the lore about the chips. And, it's interesting, the chips, that wasn't always the lore, right? There was a time when the lore was just that the clones, followed orders, that they received their marching orders from the Emperor, from Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, not Emperor yet, and they, did what they do. Good soldiers follow orders, and they turned on the Jedi. I think at a certain point that would have been untenable for the fans because of the Clone Wars television show and stuff, and how much people came to kind of fall in love with the clones. I think it would have been hard for the fans to accept that the clones that they loved so much, like Commander Cody and all the characters that they knew and liked, would just turn so heartlessly on the Jedi. I think you would have had fans, kind of constantly arguing against that, like, oh, come on, Cody would never have betrayed Obi-Wan. And then, by introducing the lore of the chips, the fact that clones had chips implanted in their brains that forced them to follow Order 66. There we go, Obi-Wan killing Grievous. It protects the fans' love for the clones, right? You don't have to question whether or not you should really look up to the clones, because they would follow an order like that so willingly. With the chips, you get to sort of have an uncomplicated relationship with the clone troopers. They are all good guys. They just, it wasn't their fault. Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Chapter 4, Defense of Kashyyyk. Obi-Wan Kenobi has taken care of General Grievous, but the Clone Wars continue. Across the galaxy, Jedi Knights lead the army of the Republic into battle against Separatist forces. Jedi Master Yoda fights on the Wookiee planet of Kashyyyk, but the Sith Lord at Darth Sidious is about to reveal himself and draw a new darkness over the galaxy. So, I think both stories can be interesting in their own ways. I think the Chips storyline is not boring per se. I think it's interesting to have stories about the clones who learned what was going on. Fives, right? Fives learning about it and trying to stop it and trying to warn people. And then you have, the clones that managed to get their chips removed, and the kind of exciting story that can come from being, from seeing the small groups of clones that, got out before the chip could activate. It also introduces storylines like when, that one storyline where the clone, goes crazy and shoots the Jedi that he's working with. One of those, two sister Jedi. But for me personally, I do think I would have found it more interesting for them to have the clones simply be soldiers, right? I think it's a bit of a cop-out to say the clones have a chip in their brains that makes them kill the Jedi. I think it's a more interesting story to figure out what is it about the environment that these soldiers are in that would allow them to turn against their Jedi comrades that they had fought alongside in battle, and to do it so callously. And I think you can pull out some more interesting stories from that dynamic. You get to think about, how do clones see the Jedi, right? And more broadly, how does the common man see the Jedi, right? We sort of see the Jedi as heroes, or at least that's the standard kind of feelings on the Jedi, I guess. Obviously, when you watch the prequels, George Lucas is kind of trying to convey that the Jedi are corrupted and should not be seen as heroes. How they treat Anakin, for instance, and his emotions. How they're driven by fear and paranoia, and their judgment is clouded. How they have become soldiers more so than true peacekeepers, They have joined the military, and are a military arm of the Republic, rather than, an order of wise peacekeepers who just want to protect stability, safety, and peace in the galaxy. Jedi hated enough by the clones that the clones could just turn on them. Or maybe the word isn't even hate, right? But whatever that emotion is, whatever that opinion is, that would allow that to happen. I personally find that that would be a more interesting story than, oh well, yeah, the clones are actually really good people, top to bottom, but oh, it's a gorgeous vista. Lovely. But they had this chip in their brain, and so, of course, they can't, we can't blame them at all for what happened. Because you do get into an awkward position as well, where, okay, so the chips made the clones kill the Jedi, but did the chips also make the clones join the Empire and stand with the Empire, even though their mission was to protect the Republic? Well, no, they did that of their own free will. Those clones that stood with the Empire, that wasn't because of a chip, right? They were just following orders and standing with the powers that be, without making their own judgments about, how right or wrong that cause was. And so the clones, in my mind, are already morally compromised. And the idea that they need to be, like, pure enough or something to not kill the Jedi doesn't really make sense. They're already morally dirtied by joining the Empire, if that makes sense. And you can still have, I think, honestly, I think the stories would be way more interesting if the clones had free will in this regard, because what about the clones that wouldn't follow Order 66? I think it's obvious enough that if the clones had free will, some of them would not be willing to turn on the Jedi. So now you have really interesting stories where, what do the clones who are brothers and comrades, what do they do when they get an order and most of them are going to follow it, but some of them are going to go the opposite direction and refuse to follow it? To me, that opens the door to some very interesting stories about conflict between clones, right? They're all brothers, and it would pain them to fight each other, but maybe they would be forced to because some of them would refuse to follow orders. So, I don't hate the fact that the clones have the chips in their brains. I think it's a fine enough story, and it's not completely uninteresting. But in my opinion, I have always felt like, I just wish that the clones would have had to make that decision themselves, right? That Palpatine gets on the blower and says, kill all the Jedi, and the clones say, yes sir, we're soldiers, that's what we do. Because, how many times in history has the military been used to destroy some group of people that, from one perspective, the military should be on the same side of, right? How many times has the military been used to destroy those soldiers did not need chips in their brain, right? Those soldiers all had free will, but there was something about their environment, about being a soldier, you know, at the time, with the factors that were present at their times, that led them to follow orders and do some terrible things that betrayed, you know, people that they should have been on the side of. And that's not even just like about soldiers killing people that they've always kind of hated, right? You know, soldiers have done this in history to people that fought alongside them for one reason or another, right? Lies being spread, or, you know, some conflict being kind of generated. So, anyway, that's a little ramble, I guess, about the clones. And also, I'm very foolish. I didn't realize that I could shut off that flow of droids. Not entirely sure. I think that guy was calling them in, so. Still more guys coming. Oh, there's one up here too. Can I make that jump? I can. Okay. Don't really know what to do after that though. Yeah, so that's some rough feelings that I have about the clones and their motivations and their lore. I think it's a shame that by using the chips, the story kind of takes away the agency of the clones, and in my opinion makes them less interesting characters because of it. Because now we don't have to grapple with the clones' motivations, we don't have to grapple with what would make these soldiers turn on their own generals. But it's still an interesting story. What's kind of fun about this mission is you're fighting droids and clones side by side. They're all of a sudden on the same side, and you just have to fight them all. Okay, I think you just can hop up here on that thing. Which you don't really see in the movies, right? Unless I'm crazy and am forgetting something. There's not really a point where the clones and the droids actually join forces like this. They sort of, I mean, it just becomes a moot point, right? Because the droid army gets shut down, right? I don't know if that's specifically addressed in episode 3. And obviously Anakin is sent to go decapitate the separatist leadership. But I don't know if it references what happens to the droids. It's been a long time since I've watched that movie. It's been a very long time since I've watched the Star Wars movies, period, actually. Be fun to crack those things open again and watch through them. Okay, how are you supposed to get... Is there a path over here? I don't know how to get my AI buddy to follow me on the jump, to get in the little thing and the little ATSD walker. Not an ATSD, what is that one called? The Republic variant, like ATRD. All-terrain recon. I think it's an ATRD, but I can't say for sure. Yeah, it's interesting how the release of Disney Star Wars content, and I normally say content with kind of a negative connotation. I don't love that word because it just it collapses art into sort of feedback slop, right? It's just content. It's just content. The quality doesn't matter, it's just content. But in this case, I will use that word for Disney Star Wars stuff because, to a large degree, it is just slop. And, anyway, yeah, it's interesting how they released they started like a tidal wave of Star Wars stuff when they bought the IP from George Lucas. Of course, they started the new movie trilogy, and then they started the Star Wars stories and the off-year movies, and of course the shows came out, and there were so many shows, but that has all drastically slowed down, and I have to imagine that's because it didn't generally do very well. So the next Star Wars thing coming out now is the Mandalorian movie. Mandalorian and Grogu, I think is the title of that one. Which, I won't hold back my opinion. I think it looks just terrible. But hold on. Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, Chapter 5, Ruin of the Jedi. Palpatine has issued Order 66, turning the clone army against the Jedi. Across the galaxy, clones have gunned down their Jedi generals. Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi have survived and head for the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. They hope to find some answers to this shocking turn of events within the Jedi archives. Yeah, the first Mandalorian and Grogu trailer, which is all I've watched. They might have released some more, I don't know, but it just was a Baby Yoda fest, It was like, hey, isn't Baby Yoda cute? Over and over again for the whole trailer. And it felt very, I don't know, my problem with The Mandalorian, I was never the biggest fan of The Mandalorian. I thought it was an okay show early on. It didn't grab me the way it grabbed a lot of other people. I didn't like the adventure of the week sort of adventures that he went on. I was a little more into the central narrative with Grogu and Giancarlo Esposito, and that whole plotline early on in season 3. I mean, once you learned Giancarlo's whole plan, Moff Gideon, I just thought it was so boring and uncreative. Like, it was the kind of story that I would have come up with as an 8-year-old playing with my brother or my friend on the playground, playing make-believe Star Wars, right? Giancarlo having this whole plan of like, I'm going to combine the best of the cloners and the Jedi and the Mandalorians and create a super version of myself or whatever. Also, spoilers for The Mandalorian. Sorry, I should have led with that. I guess I'll put that, I'll put a warning about that on this video. At the front of this video, maybe some text on screen. Mandalorian spoilers. But yeah, it was like, it just felt like such a childish notion of what a villain would be doing. You know, of course the villain has to play with all of the cool toys that we as Star Wars fans like. He has to combine the Mandalorians, which, we Star Wars fans love the Mandalorians. I mean, I know Dave Filoni does. He is obsessed with them, and frankly, I think he's ruined them. What made the Mandalorians cool, Dave Filoni has just destroyed with the Mandalorian show and with his obsession with the Mandalorians. Sorry, I'm being kind of harsh, but you know, the Mandalorian culture that we see in Mando Season 3 is just like pathetic and strange and dead, and I don't know, I won't get into all that, but suffice it to say, I did not like that season of that show. And so anyway, I'm rambling. I'm getting off track. What was I even supposed to be on track about? What was I saying? I'm a madman. What's going on? Where am I? Who are you? How did I get here? Somebody help me. But yeah, so the new Mandalorian movie is coming out, and I could not be less excited for it, to be honest. I will probably see it, maybe, just because I don't mind seeing a bad movie. I do mind seeing a bad show, because shows take up a long time of your life. Watching like an 8-episode show with an hour episode each, 8 hours is too much time to sink into something really bad. But if I go to the theater and can sit there for 120 minutes and watch something bad, that's not a big deal. And it'll be fun to talk about, at least. I have a friend, a really good friend, that I made in college, and we don't live near each other anymore. But back when we were watching all of the Star Wars stuff, we would have therapy session phone calls. We would call each other and just basically rip apart the new Star Wars stuff. Because he was as big of a fan of Star Wars as I was, you know. I mean, we were the two biggest little fanboys of Star Wars that ever lived. And the new Disney stuff broke our spirits. So we went through a similar grieving process, I suppose you could say, of disconnecting from Star Wars. Also, there goes Shock T in another one of her many deaths. So my buddy, we would get on the phone, we'd watch the new episode of Mando Season 3, and then we'd get on the phone and just decompress about how terrible it was. And then Andor came along, and we had a bright spot in our lives, in the Star Wars world anyways. Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Chapter 6, Darth Vader. Anakin Skywalker, once the young pod racing champion of Tatooine, Padawan to Obi-Wan Kenobi and hero of the Clone Wars, has finally given into his secret emotions and fallen to the dark side. His wife Padme rushes to the volcanic world of Mustafar, hoping to turn Anakin back from his dark path. She has no idea that Anakin's former master Obi-Wan is hiding aboard her ship. And I should say, if you like the Star Wars stuff, I don't mean to trash what you like. It's okay for you to like it, or, for us to have different opinions. But, yeah, the type of stuff that they were putting out, and, Filoni, man. Filoni, I feel like people saw Filoni as this brilliant guy that, understood Star Wars in a way that the suits over at Disney didn't. And don't get me wrong, Disney has been a horrible caretaker of Star Wars. They've made a bunch of junk. But Dave Filoni has his own problems. And I really don't think that he's very good at making Star Wars stuff. I think to the extent that stuff like Clone Wars and Rebels turned out well, which I don't even think that they're amazing. I think people have very fond memories of the Clone Wars TV show, but I think if you go back and watch it as an adult, there's a lot of garbage, which is okay. It's a kid's show. I'm not trying to hold it to some standard of AMC prestige television. But the Clone Wars does not hold up in many ways, but it also does in a lot of ways. It is a complicated TV show. There's some great stuff in it and some real low lows. I think to the extent that stuff was interesting, however, a large part of that was because it was not Dave Filoni alone. He did not have full power on the Clone Wars, right? Early on, he was working with George Lucas, and so George was still overseeing it and preventing Filoni from running wild. He also had a whole creative team, right? And I think at a certain point, as Disney Star Wars was foundering, they said, oh, you know who can save us? Dave Filoni. He did all of that great animated Star Wars stuff. The problem is, when you let Dave Filoni run wild by himself without any supervision or, anybody who can sort of rein in his fanboy impulses, I think he makes some pretty bad Star Wars stuff. Or at least not amazing. And I don't mean to trash on Filoni. I think he's, I think he's got a lot of passion for Star Wars, and I think he's a cool guy, and obviously wants to make great Star Wars stuff. But I think at the end of the day, he's a dude that really wants to play with his toys, and that does not always make for the most interesting stories. really like this level. I think it's very fun how there's this element of Obi-Wan and Anakin have to work together through these areas. Obviously, like, from a gameplay perspective, you need to have a multiplayer game where these characters can kind of, you can have two players that are working together to play the mission. But yeah, I just think it's a very fun, lighthearted way of doing this mission where Obi-Wan and Anakin, have to use the Force to overcome obstacles together, and then it keeps bouncing between those moments of cooperation and the moments of dueling each other, fighting each other. In the cutscenes. And then at the end, of course, there is a little fight between the two of them, which is a fun. Oh yeah, here it is. We get a bunch of health each. And I don't remember how this works in multiplayer. I don't know if Obi-Wan has to win in multiplayer for the level to progress, or just whoever wins, you then go into the cutscene. I don't know. There he goes. Anakin burning up in the lava. Yeah, but I was talking about the Mandalorian movie, and yeah, it just seems like, oh, Baby Yoda is so popular, we're gonna shove him in the trailer a lot, and I have no idea what the movie is even going to be about. Also, Jeremy Allen White is playing Jabba the Hutt's kid from the Clone Wars, and he's all grown up, and he has like a 12-pack, and I think it's so funny. Jeremy Allen White is playing a buff Jabba the Hutt dude. We live in a world beyond parody. There goes Padme. Rest in peace. Died of a broken heart. Here comes Sidious to collect Anakin. And the classic Darth Vader is born. Darth Vader in his suit. And Padme, did she survive? It seems in your anger you killed her. No. Yeah, I do think that Grogu in the Mandalorian should have ended with the Mandalorian delivering Grogu to Luke Skywalker. And Grogu should have stayed there and the show should have ended. Or if the show continued, that's fine, but do not bring Grogu back. I thought that was a really bad creative choice, and my suspicion is that they just did that because Grogu was such a popular character that no, of course we can't get rid of Grogu. So anyway, I'll go spend our studs on some new characters here. Let's see who we get today. Plo Koon, General Grievous, clone, another clone, Mace Windu, disguised clone. What else do we have? All the ships down here somewhere. Yeah, we're not buying ships. We're not out here buying ships. Buys Darth Maul, Zam Wessel, another clone, and a super battle droid. Alright, oh, the Cantina Band. You guys aren't playing music. You're just chilling. Oh wait, that's really cute. I think that's because I turned off the music in the game. So I'm assuming that's like they're making the animation reflect the fact that I turned off the music, and so the band has nothing to do. If I'm right about that, I think that's really adorable and a wonderful little touch by the developers. Those kind of fun little touches that, you know, I just love. It feels like the developers are thinking about the game and having fun with it, you know. Someone had a really fun idea and was like, oh guys, I've got a great idea. What if when the player turns off the music, the band stops playing in the cantina? I love that. That's really charming. Once I stop recording, I think I'll go back in there and test that out. Alright, my friends, well, thank you for joining me for episode 3 of Star Wars. Until next time, please take care of yourselves, and I will do the same.